Professor Glaude, it's an honor. It's an honor to meet you and to be in conversation with you. Thank you for taking the time.
It's my honor and it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
I think about the way the country has changed since Baldwin was alive, and
Mm,
the way the country's sense of itself has changed.
mhm,
Um, and I think about our self-understanding, um, or to what extent the country recognizes itself as a moral people.
mm,
Um, to what extent the country's even invested in that sense of itself anymore,
mm,
right? Um, I think about, I think for many of us, when there was a sense of relief that came when people realized, or when, at least for me, there was a sigh of relief that came when I saw that the news of Alex Preddy's killing was that it affected, that it seemed to pass this threshold,
mm.
that it somehow affected things, that there was some sense of a response.
Yeah.
And it made me think, okay, well then maybe maybe there is some concern for our moral character as a country that might be appealed to in some meaningful way. Like how do you think about how we've changed and what that means for the how our sense of ourselves has changed and what that means for the struggle that we have to commit ourselves to in this
I
moment?
mean, it's such a great question because I've been struggling with it. I've been trying in my public facing work to really foreground this moral question, the moral rot that's at the heart of the country.
Yeah.
What's interesting about the Alex Preddy horror is that I think sometimes, some days, in my darker moments, I'm thinking people are more interested in defending the Second Amendment than defending the life of Alex Preddy. It's the
Yeah.
reaction or the response around that video. Uh, and when you juxtapose it to the response to the Renee Good video, the difference, of course, um, beyond the car and the like, or the truck, is that he had a gun, and they said he brought a gun to a protest, and all of these Second Amendment people um, came out. It was like, what do you mean? So I'm not so sure if they're some of them at least are horrified by the assassination, the execution of Alex Preddy, um, or worried about their own guns. So
Yeah.
for 40 years, 40 to for 40 years, over 40 years, we have been awash in an economic system and in a political ideology or political economy that has transformed us from people in community with each other to self-interested persons in competition and rivalry with each other. A kind of selfishness has become the definition of liberty and freedom. We've witnessed since the age of Reagan, since its beginnings, a kind of an erosion of any robust notion of the public good, a
Right.
shredding of the social safety net. Our responsibility has become only to ourselves and to those in our tribe. And we saw that very clearly during COVID when we were debating
Hmm.
whether or not to wear masks, right? Because it was an impingement upon one's freedom, as it were, right?
Right.
So
Right.
only a self-regard. And Baldwin saw this. He was, and he saw us, Black folk, implicated in it. When Baldwin passes away in December of 1987, people were more interested in what kind of sweaters Bill Cosby was wearing than what he was saying. And so when you read the evidence of things not seen, Baldwin is querying, right? What do we mean by freedom? What does freedom look like when Black folk have power? What is, what does it mean when we assent, when we consent to the world as it is, when we
Yeah.
adjust ourselves to this ugliness? And so the material conditions, the class stratification, the the utter greed, the sense of objection that defines American life makes it very difficult to understand what are what are the moral commitments What's the basis of the social contract? What are our obligations to each other?
Right.
And
Right.
so then you ask the question, I'm just unpacking what I take the question to be. What then, what then are, if we don't know what our obligations are to each other, how then do we hail? How
Right.
do we
Right.
address each other?
Right.
Right? Do we
Right. How do
only
we appeal to each other?
exactly,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And it seems to me in this moment, it requires a combination of things. We have to bear witness to the fact of that erosion, to the fact that the politics that overrun the moment are actually a reflection, right, of a deeper condition,
Right.
right? And that condition, to my mind, is profoundly moral, right? That the moral monsters are roaming the land.
Right.
And unless we say that as such, then we're going to be treating, right, the reality of our lives as if they're just simply political realities, when in fact, right, it's a reflection of a deep moral rot, right? A deep
Yeah.
moral rot. And, the country's 250 years old now. It doesn't have sprite, it's not it doesn't have sprightly legs like it used to have. Its chin isn't as tough as it once were. So as it
Yeah.
once was. So what does it mean for us in this moment to be dealing with this again under these conditions, right?
Right.
And we can begin to
Right.
tell a thicker story, a materialist story, as well as a moral story about the current condition that makes it difficult to address. But so we have to bear witness, and then we bear witness to what is happening, and we have to understand the moral claim that ought to drive our political claims. That we can't see these two things as separate,
Right. Right.
because it's
Right.
imperative that we be clear about um, 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 the values that drive the world that we're fighting and risking everything for, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
It does. It does. I noticed that when you talk about, you move interchangeably between using the word world and country, right? And I think that you're being figurative about the world, but I think not only, right?
Right.
Not only because I know that you're very tuned into the implications of America's place in the world.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering, I find that a lot of times our our struggles, and some of this is just we come by this honestly because it's hard to see it's hard to
Hmm.
see that far beyond your own circumstances, right?
Hmm.
And but a part of this is that sometimes I think that we want to change the country, but we don't want to change the country's power.
Hmm.
Like we want to, there's a way in which like our vision for a changed America is one that we change America, but we still want it to be just as powerful as it is in the world. And it doesn't translate to a real critical look at how, in order for the country to be changed, it has to be sort of complete transformation. We have to move towards greater interdependence on the world stage. We have to move, right? Or we have to uh, reform American foreign policy
Hmm.
alongside all of these change. Could you say more
Of
about that?
course, of course. I mean, you think about Dr. King at the end of his life talking about the triple evils,
Hmm.
right? Um, uh, and those evils, of course, involved militarism. It involved an economic system that presupposed disposable people. It involved the idea that some people think that because of the color of their skin, that they're valued more than others, white supremacy, capitalism, and militarism, in some ways, right? And not in some ways, clearly. And so
Yeah.
it seems to me that, when I use the word world, I'm referencing, as you rightly noted, different registers. I'm registering the life world of the individual.
Hmm.
That is concentric, that consists of a kind of concentric circles.
Hmm.
The world of our immediate living, right? And it gets at
Hmm.
the distance, and how all of it matters to how we take in, um, what is coming at us and how we imagine the life that is fully our own.
Right.
And so we are in a moment where the critique of America as the hegemon, the idea of empire that is being nostalgically retrieved, 19th century versions of imperialism, right? Um, the collapse of the post-war II, World War II consensus that kept Europe from turning on itself, right? That allowed the
Hmm.
US to emerge as a world power, but devastated the global South, right? In so many ways.
Hmm.
That world is shifting and changing. So even as we talk about, how can I put this? Let me say it differently. We are in a moment, a time of shattered mirrors, where America, this place, right, refuses to see itself for what it is. And the world, in all of its registers, has to bear the brunt of that fact. Trump doesn't want to, anything, they want to be white without judgment.
Hmm.
They want
Hmm.
power without judgment.
Hmm.
They want the world to shut up and be grateful. And the consequences for that adolescent uh, uh, orientation for domestic reality and global realities, right? Can the consequences cannot be understated, right? Death comes in tow, destruction comes in tow, right? So I think part of the challenge, right, is to kind of how do we intervene, right, in our bearing witness in such a way that allows these levels to come into view, right? So it
Hmm.
makes sense to
Hmm.
me as we
Hmm.
critique this moment that we have to say something about what's happening in Gaza. We have to say something about what happens in Sudan. We have to say something about the way the US has behaved vis-a-vis Venezuela, the threats of vis-a-vis Iran. Uh, all of this stuff matters, right? Because I mean, to stop talking so much, but to think about the parallel between, or the way in which Trump thinks about the success of Venezuela and what he's doing in the Twin Cities in Minnesota,
Right.
the
Right.
connection
Right.
between these realities. We have to, if we're going to offer a moral and political intervention in the moment, if that makes sense, Lucas. I keep
It
saying that. Yeah.
does. It does.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's I think about so in Begin Again, you referenced the story of Kwame Ture coming back
Oh,
and having his
yeah.
passport taken, right? For after having uh I was going to say criticize the United States, but it was much more than criticize the United States after,
Right,
really,
right,
it
right,
was a rebuke. It was a profound rebuke of the country.
right.
And I think, I juxtapose that with, what Malik al-Shabazz was doing at the United Nations and when he was traveling the world before his murder. And I think about, King's breaking the silence and his criticism of U.S. foreign policy and how that, was the beginning of his, well, not the beginning of his decline in popularity, but certainly it
Absolutely.
had a consequence for him. Um, and I think about I had this experience. I found myself when people were I found people in the United States really celebrating the fact that Israel was being brought to The Hague and that the International Criminal Court was pursuing charges against Netanyahu and so on and so forth. And I found in general that there was this excitement about this institution and many people were learning about it for the first time. And I thought to myself, well, what if that translated to a movement to make the U.S. a signatory to ratify, its
Mhm.
belonging to these conventions, right? Like
Mhm.
you know, how is it? How can we? What does it mean for us to recognize our interdependence with peoples elsewhere in the globe in a way that like is it even possible? Because there's a scale to all of this that makes it hard to stay focused, right? You know, when you're fighting for your own rights, and it makes it hard to pay attention to what's happening to Venezuela, right?
Mhm.
And so on and so forth. But I see in some ways like a radical possibility in the responses that these these latest, episodes of American brutality
Mm.
elsewhere in the world have, the reactions that they've produced show that there's an expanded empathy there, and there's a
Amongst
capacity for something there.
mm,
But how do we translate that into something more meaningful in our disposition so that we
yeah.
so like we have this kind of bifurcated way of engaging in our struggle, and I where we in a way it's not inconsistent with I know you were critical of Hillary Clinton, for example, like, right, and it's not inconsistent with the way democratic politics happens in general, right? We kind of compartmentalize. We take this win and we ignore that one,
Mm.
that problem, right? But what does it mean for us to kind of form ourselves as moral people and for and shape our movements in a way that is actually consistent with the kind of um, people we need to be, with the
Mm.
kind of critique we need to represent,
Mm.
the kind of the dissent that I should say that we need to represent.
I wish I had an answer that was more developed, but I know what my gut says. The feeling in my gut is that we have to reject um, grounding um, our claims in any notion of American exceptionalism. Going back to where we started, the idea of America oftentimes, right, carries forward um, or contains the lie that leads us to believe that only one revolution was necessary, and that was the American Revolution, and all that we need to do is to remember and to restore.
Right.
That America is always already on the road to a more perfect union, that this is the shining city on the hill, and that exceptionalism, right, orients us to the project in a way that at its heart is always good, that good sits at the heart of the American project. And part of what we have to do, I think, is not engage in a whole, we don't throw away the entire thing. That doesn't make any sense to me. We don't need to um, rest in a kind of Afro-pessimist view, right? That the
Mhm.
world as it is anti-Black, and any effort at resistance simply reinforces or reinscribes that anti-Blackness. I don't think that's right. But what I do know is this: if we tell a story, a different story of ourselves, not one that in which every act is an indication that we're on the road to a more perfect union, or not that if we fail, that's all we need to do is to remember the principles of the Constitution and the Declaration, and that will settle all problems for us. But if we take a more tragic sense, a more tragic orientation to our story, and you can see this in Robert Bella's The Broken Covenant, which was
Mm.
published in 75, right? Where he's talking about we need to tell a different kind of story, one that attends to our failings, one that attends to the corporate capture of our ideals, the way in which hatreds and grievance motivate so much of the history of the country. This is Robert Penn Warren in The Legacy of the Civil War,
Mm.
calling for a different kind of story, something that will allow for, and this is going to sound a bit abstract, but something that will allow the country to finally grow the fuck up.